I'd like to welcome everyone to the fourth installment of the Maryland Advanced Good Ag Practices series, where we break down key components of the Harmonized GAP Standard, which is a voluntary produce safety certification program. And we discuss these key components in ways that make them attainable in your operation. The series as a whole is brought to you by the Maryland Food Safety Network, and we are a group of produce safety specialists from University of Maryland Extension, University of Maryland College Park, the Agricultural Law Education Initiative, and the Maryland Department of Agriculture. My name is Angela Ferrelli, and I will be your host today. It is my pleasure to introduce two presenters today. They are co-presenting on traceability. It's first my pleasure to introduce Ms. Carol Allen, who is an agent associate in food safety at the University of Maryland. Carol, go ahead and wave to everybody. There you go, there's Carol. In her role as an agent associate, Carol assists farmers in Southern and Western Maryland to reach their food safety goals. She is a PSA trainer and holds a master's degree in plant science with a concentration in plant pathology, plant viruses, and integrated pest management. Carol's going to be sharing how to create a lot system and implement this to track your product as it's sold to customers, otherwise known as your traceability system in your farm. And co-presenting with Carol today is Miss Sarah Everhart. Sarah, go ahead, wave to everyone. There we go, there's Sarah. Sarah is a senior legal specialist at the Agricultural Law Education Initiative at the University of Maryland Francis King Carey School of Law. She is a graduate of Washington College and a cum laude graduate of Elizabeth Haub School of Law at Pace University. Sarah practiced law in Maryland for 9 years prior to joining ALEI, and she currently sits on the Talbot County Soil Conservation Board of Supervisors. Today, Sarah is going to follow Carol's talk to speak about how to work with your operational team to create a recall plan for your farm. Much like going through a fire drill, preparedness for a recall plan is a good asset for your overall business health. So with that, I'll ask Carol, go ahead and share your slides.
All right, so Sarah and I are going to talk about traceability and recall readiness, and basically what does that mean on your farm? So I want to show you some smiling faces of some of our cohorts and colleagues in the Maryland Food Safety Network, and Amy and all of us are very, very happy to help you on the farm anytime you want. Angela and I have to say, are passionate about food safety. We love to get out on the farm and work with our farmers one-on-one and help them kind of overcome. Sometimes it's a little confusing, maybe, I don't know, but please feel free to call on us. And as usual, anytime we have a university program or activity or facilities, these are available to all without regard to race, color, sex, gender, identity, or expression, sexual orientation, marital status, age, national origin, political affiliation, physical or mental disability, religion, protected veteran status, genetic information, personal appearance, and any other legally protected class. So all are welcome. All right, so what I'm going to talk about today in my front half is I'm going to run you through some of the standards that are in the Harmonized GAP Plan. This is USDA Harmonized GAP Plan. Now I have to tell you, they just published a new standard and checklist for 2021. And so what I'm telling you is aligned with this new standard. This new standard, in case you want to explore it, I think I have a link later on, does have some changes. And again, all of us at the Maryland Food Safety Network will be happy to run you through. If you have HGAP certification or HGAP Plus certification, you probably want to go through the new standard. These new standards are going to take effect on May 1st of 2021. So I assure you that what I'm going to talk about today is aligned with those new standards. All right, so let's get going. If you remember Angela's presentation a couple of weeks ago and Molly's presentation, they both talked about when a standard is either mandatory, requires a written plan, requires records. So what I have done on each one of these standards that I'm presenting, I've used the M, the WP, and the R in bold to show you, to emphasize the fact that these standards are one of the above, mandatory written plan or you are required to have records. So in the general section, G6 is all about traceability. And G6-1 or point 1 states a documented traceability program shall be established. So what does that mean to you? So things that you're going to be required to have, because this is mandatory, a written plan is required, and then records documenting the implementation of some of these points are going to be required. So let's get into the nitty-gritty. Records show product delivery to recipients. Now the standard says except direct to consumer sales. So this records showing product delivery is what we refer to with trace forward. Now, I do point out that direct to consumer sales records are not required. I'm going to sidebar here and say that it's a good business practice to know where your product goes. This gives you good feedback for future planning. So it's not required, but it's a good idea. All right. So records, so that's trace forward part. Now, records show all inputs to the product, including any soil amendments that you might have made, or if you're growing under artificial substrate, like with hydroponics or microgreens, you'd be using an artificial substrate. So you would have to document what you're using, when you're using it, and all of the particulars, where, when, who, what about your seeds or your transplant plugs, any chemicals, including homemade preparations that is applied to that crop. And this is what we refer to as trace back. Also, you're going to need to maintain records that detail the harvest, who was there, who harvested it, when was it harvested, the quantities. Now, of course, that's just a good business practice. And specific is going to be farm location, and then what transportation was utilized and when. So now you need to know that records can be maintained either paper and pencil, all right, if that's your comfort level, or electronic format. They can be stored on or off the site, but when an auditor comes to visit you, you have to be able to get those within 4 hours of the audit. So just keep them handy. All right, now, the Maryland Food Safety Network stands ready to help you through this process, but I also have some other resources that you might find helpful. The Carolina Farm Stewardship Association have a wonderful publication that goes through Harmonized GAP, and I do believe they have updated it. That link says 2019, but I bet they've updated it. And then ALEI also has two excellent publications. One is Extension Bulletin EB 429, the Model Recall Plan, and then Extension Bulletin EB 430, which is a guide to drafting a recall plan. So both of those would be invaluable for helping you make it through some of these complexities. All right, so moving on to the next standard, G 6.2, a trace back and trace forward exercise shall be performed at least annually. And you notice that R, so that means records are required on this. So what you're going to do once a year is you are going to pick one of your commodities and you're going to contact your distributors who received your goods and say, hey, what happened to XYZ shipment of summer squash? Did you sell it all? Is some still in the warehouse? I've had traceability and recall training, and the teachers advised you not to say, hi, I am doing a practice recall, because your listener on the phone is only going to hear the word recall. They're not going to hear the practice or the mock. They're going to hear recall, and their eyes are going to get big, and their blood pressure is going to go up. So word it in such that you are just looking to see, where did your product go? So what you want to achieve is accurate traceability within 4 hours. So within 4 hours, you should be able to reach out and touch where all of your product has gone that you're doing in this, this exercise. And you have to trace 100% of the product to the recipients, okay? So the standard says if this exercise has not been performed within a year of the audit, or there are no records, you're going to need to record all of your steps. A traceability exercise will be performed during the audit. So it behooves you to allocate some time with your team and go through a recall exercise and see, can I track down every little summer squash if that's the crop that you're tracing, all right, within 4 hours and 100%. All right, so G-7 of the standard talks about a recall program, and G7.1 states documented recall program, including written procedures, shall be established. So notice we've got mandatory, written plan, and records that things happened, all right? So I'm going to expound upon this in the next few slides, but basically what the standard says is that you want to establish a recall team. And this is going to be folks that maybe your partners, your family, you can reach out to a bunch of folks to help you form that recall team, all right? And then as stated in the previous standard, you'll perform this recall exercise annually, and it's going to include a trace forward and a trace back. Now I'm going to mention trace back should probably be part of your farm records anyway. That's just good business. So a lot of this is just good business. All right, so how do you start? Well, probably one way to start would be to map your fields, organize your records, and we're going to create a lot code, and I'll get into that. So you can use Google Map and pull a copy, or Google Earth. Actually, I think Google Earth allows you to mark over, and you probably are going to want to delineate your fields and probably put some name or code to each growing area, okay? So start there, create a code for each field. It's going to be to your advantage to get the GPS location of these fields, organize your records, and then what's a lot? So a lot, set in air quotes, all right, not a lot, but a lot, is probably going to be the amount harvested in one day of one commodity from one field. You get to define what a lot is, but I caution you, don't make it too big. You want to make it pretty specific. So let's go through and we'll look at this a little bit more closely. So the standard says at a minimum, the farmer should be able to trace a product back one step, all right, to the field and the inputs required to grow it, and one step forward. Who bought it? Where did it go? So let's take a hypothetical broccoli crop that is grown in a farmer's field number 2, okay? So where do we go from there? So in the farm records, he's going to know what was his fertilizer application, what was applied, and when was it applied. You're going to want the water quality records of irrigation, okay? What is the water quality of the irrigation that went on that crop? And then what pesticides were used? So this would be, I'm going to expand that to mean not just pesticides, but growth regulators, anything that would be applied to that crop, you're going to want to have a record of. Then who harvested it? Who was on that day? You want a record of who was on the harvest duty that day, okay? And then you're going to go back so far as to actually identify the variety of the broccoli. Did you get it in plugs? Do you get it in seed? Who did you buy it from? Okay, so these are your trace back steps, and you're going to have those probably in your farm records. Your job is going to be, let's organize them so that you can kind of put them together. Then from there, all right, we're still in field number 2, we're still with broccoli. You're going to want the date harvested. And then if it went to a separate packing facility, the date packed. And then where did it go from here? In our hypothetical crop, we've got a few bushels that were sold at the South Street Market. A few bushels were sold at the home farm stand, okay, on site. And then some bushels were sent out for wholesale. And you're going to want records of everything here. Where did it go? Was it handled or packed separately? Where was it handled or packed? Who handled and packed it? When was that done? Then harvested, your field, and all of your inputs. You're going to want a record of all of those steps. Because what we're going to do with them is we're going to take all of that information and we're going to sum it up in a code or a lot number. Now this is, you get to make your own code. So I just put a hypothetical code, which is probably doesn't have quite enough information on it, but it just gives you an idea that maybe number 2, the leading number 2, refers to the field. And maybe it was harvest lot number 3. So in this hypothetical situation, I'm saying this is the 3rd picking on this broccoli crop. So you've got 2 for the field, 3 for the picking, and then 2019, the year that it was picked. So your record, this should trace right back to all of these records. And then what we're going to talk about in a few slides is how you're going to put that information and that code, that expanded code, on your product. Now, I do want to point out that by the HGAP standards, what was sent to the South Street market and was sold on the home farm is exempt from the traceability and recall under the HGAP plan, but it's a good idea to know where your product has gone, so it's good business. So create your code, and you're going to put that code for this lot, this broccoli number 2, 3rd picking 2019, all right, on all of your outgoing boxes. Be there on that code. The commodity or the produce item, so you're going to have either a code or the broccoli name, the farm location where the produce was grown. Maybe some farms have, they have the home field and then they have a name for Johnson's farm that maybe they acquired on down the line. So it's not inconceivable that under one umbrella name, there's going to be different acquisitions or different locations that the farmer is going to need to identify. And then specifically where the produce was harvested. And again, it's a good idea to have the GPS location for that. You want the harvest date, who was on that day, who harvested it. Did it go to a packing house? Which one? The packing date, again, if that's different from the harvest date, and the packing crew, if that's different from the harvest crew. So what are you going to do with all that information? So let's take a look at this label. All right, this is our label here. All right, and this is going on every package of these apples. And this is the lot code that the farm made up. So let's take a look at that. So the farm location is the leading number. And again, the numbers can be in any order that you want. This is your code. When asked, you need to decipher it. You need to have the ability to give the information that the code refers to. So the farm location is location number 10, which refers to the Rose Farm. So again, maybe another acquisition to the home farm. Block number 1, in this case, we're talking about apples. So that's probably a harvest group or a block of trees in the orchard. The fruit type is 01, which for this farm means apples. The variety is 05, which is Empire apples. The harvest date is done in the Julian calendar, and it's 284. Well, I looked it up. So 284 is October 11. So the Julian calendar does give you a date, starting with January 1st being day 1, and then December 30th, what's the last day in December, 30 or 31, being 365. All right, so it's a good way of keeping track of things with just a simple number rather than writing out October 11th. All right, so on this label, you have the date, all right, that it was probably packed, Rose Farm, Block 1, all crew on board, and then all of that information plus more is in the lot code. Now, there's a couple of different ways that you can do this. There are wonderful machines that will make sticky labels for you, and that you can just slap that onto your bushel or your box or your clamshell. You might want to embrace the QR code technology. It does give you all of this information and possibly more, with just since almost everybody has a smartphone and can read a QR code. So you could also use a QR code. So all of these decisions, how you put that number together, what your label looks like is up to you. You've just got to be able to translate it. And you can put it on your product container, either a sticky label, you could stencil it, or a QR code, whatever you want, as long as that information is there. Okay. So that's creating a lot. So if you have any questions about that process, put them in the chat now and we'll catch up later. So some other things that might be handy. Do you need a customer complaint code or a customer complaint form? All right. Here is a sample form, thanks to ALEI, Sarah and her compatriots. And you could use any kind of form, but when someone calls and complains that your product was sub-quality, yeah, I know. I've worked in retail and with consumers for a bulk of my life. And I know sometimes the claims are outrageous, but you probably want to keep a record of any time your product was found to be less than a person's standards. Just have that record. It's a good idea. Okay. So the biggest thing about getting organized for traceability recall is getting all of the things that you need together, getting it in one spot so you can lay your hands on it. So that's going to include your supplier list. And for every supplier, from the widgets to the packing containers to the plugs, you're going to want who do you speak to in that company, their phone numbers, their email, their address, and everything that will facilitate reaching them if you had to very rapidly. So seed and plug suppliers, your soil amendment suppliers, any chemicals that you're using on your product, your pest control contractor, if you have one, if you have a porta potty contractor, have that information handy. Then all of your shipping containers, suppliers, and then any transportation companies that you might use. And you want all of that supplier list organized at your fingertips. And then on the step forward, who are your customers? Do you have buyers, particularly for wholesale operations? And you're going to want their names and all of their contact information. So think about, do you sell direct to a grocery store, restaurant, or does it go to an auction house? Who do you speak to? What is their contact information? Then if you attend a farmer's market, if you go to farmer's market, you might want not only the farm market name and location, but the manager's numbers, assistant manager's numbers. Who do you contact at that location? And then you might also want, who are your neighbors? There's a lot of reasons for having neighbors' contact information handy. Sometimes we have environmental issues that might occur that you might want to get in touch with them pretty rapidly. So all of this stuff should be on your Rolodex, showing my age. All right. And then in the case of a recall, who's going to help you? So you want to formulate your team. Who are you going to reach out to? So this is probably going to be a huddle with all of these people, a meeting, Zoom nowadays, so that you know who can help you for what stage should you be involved in a recall. So definitely your working partners, and that may be your family. Some of your employees. I've been to many a farm where the farm manager has been there for 25, 30 years. That's a trusted employee. Then folks like your insurance agent, you want to get in touch with them because they might be involved. Any legal counsel that would be involved. And look for your commodity associations. A lot of those folks can help you go through some of the paperwork and the communication issues that would be involved in the case of a recall. So right off the top, who's going to make the decisions? Someone's going to have to be the boss. And that needs to be established with all of your team. And it's got to be, they have to have buy-in of who's the person who's going to make the decisions. Then maybe based on all of those folks' abilities, who is going to talk to the employees? Who's going to talk to the press? Who's going to talk to the public? All right. Also, who's going to be the liaison to suppliers and the buyers? So you need to think about who in your team is going to be best for that job. So to be prepared for a recall, it's best to have a plan. You need to have recall tasks. So what are you going to do? Then based on your team that you put together, who should do or supervise each task? So you're going to want to assign roles and responsibilities to all of those folks that are helping you out. And then who of the external resources, like maybe your commodity association, can also lend a hand. And then you're going to want to establish a relative timeline. When do each one of these tasks get accomplished? And some of the resources that I gave you earlier actually touch on this, and I think Sarah is also going to talk about this. And then for each task that needs to be done, you might need templates, you might need some tools, and definitely you're going to want someone to keep track of record keeping. If you're not the maven of record keeping, assign someone on your team to keep track of all of the records. And again, contact information, accurate and up to date for all team members. And that needs to be right on that Rolodex. All right, so tasks are going to break down into kind of 4 basic groups. In the face of a recall, did something go wrong with the machinery? The technical aspect of your harvest and packing operation. So you might assign the technical end of this situation to someone that's particularly adept at it. And then it's probably, since a recall has been initiated for one reason or another, you will have regulatory personnel that you will need to interface with. Is someone on your team particularly adept at that? Maybe they know some of the regulatory bodies, they know who their inspection agent is, who their auditor is. So assign that kind of task to another one. And then there's always in a group someone who's better at communication than others. So that might be assigned to another individual on your team. And they're going to cover both the mandatory and the reputation management. And with a recall, there is reputation management that needs to be done. And then who's going to oversee the insurance claim, dealing with the legal aspect? What about if the banks get involved? So you're going to need some administration help as well. So looking at just those 4 different kinds of tasks, you want to assign those responsibilities to your team based on their strengths. And if you don't have someone who is strong in that, then by doing this ahead of time, okay, war games, mock war games, you can think about, well, who would I call on and establish that reputation. So you're going to make lists. I hope you're good at making lists. So you're going to want, as I mentioned, team members with contact information, all of your external resources, both the commodities that we listed earlier, legal, insurance, bank, etc. And then probably get to know who would you need to communicate, who's going to be on your farm that you need to talk to. And then you're going to need key contacts for those particular resources. And then besides thinking about, okay, who's going to help me? Part of it is going to be, who am I talking to? Because you've got a list of different audiences and they all need to be handled just a little bit differently. Certainly, you're going to be talking to regulators. And that they're going to be the ones looking at your records and asking, so what is your harvest, your packing, handling, what is your protocol? But then you've got the public to deal with. And the public may include press. So you've got consumers, public, you've got customers who received the product involved in the recall, and then you've got the customers who did not receive the product. And all of those 3 audiences will need to be handled very carefully, all right? And then what about your employees? Going through a recall process can be very, very disconcerting to your employees who wonder, am I going to have a job tomorrow? So you're going to need a liaison that goes back to the employees, can give them the absolute truth, what is going on, and assure them that we will make it through this, okay? All right, so you might want to, ahead of time, get to know some of these folks. How do you get to know them? Well, go to grower meetings because a lot of times they're there. So MDA, Maryland Department of Agriculture's Food Quality Assurance Department is headed up by Deanna Baldwin. She's a nice lady. I work with her a lot, we all do. Then perhaps get to know who would handle your area at the Maryland Department of Health and get to know them on a get to know you basis before you need them. And then also anyone else in the Maryland Department of Agriculture that might be involved. And then who in the Food and Drug Administration, there are regional officers, and I do not know who our regional officer is, but you might want to reach out to them. Okay, so that concludes my portion of the talk. I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Sarah.
Okay, great. Well, good morning, everybody. I know quite a few of you. To those who I don't know, I'm Sarah Everhart. I'm a senior legal specialist with the Ag Law Education Initiative. I am going to go through some of these recall steps. I like Carol's analogy of that what we're doing today is kind of like a fire drill. I think that's right on. I know this is not something that most folks want to necessarily think about, and planning for it can be a little anxiety inducing. I hope that by talking about the planning, and I'm going to talk you through some of the steps, what would happen if your farm was associated with something like this. Hopefully we're going to reduce some of that stress and just give you some more information so you can be as prepared as possible. So there's a couple different ways that a recall could be initiated. Could have gotten a notification by a customer. So like Carol was saying, you know, you get that dreaded call from a customer, hey, I think your food made me sick. You could be notified by a regulatory agency. So, you know, FDA does random sampling. So, you know, if FDA comes out to your farm and does some random sampling, that could be another way that things are initiated. Or you could be the one to make an internal discovery. So, you know, you get something like some water testing back. You know, unfortunately, the water testing comes back with high E. coli levels. You know that a lot just, you know, went to the farmer's market the day before. So, you know, you could potentially have an issue on your hands there, something that you came across. So not every complaint is going to result in a recall, right? We all know that. And like Carol was saying, you know, you're dealing with the public, you might get some complaints that aren't necessarily, you know, that are not going to cause something as severe as a recall to happen, but you should take every complaint seriously. And dealing with customer complaints is definitely something that you should talk to your staff about. So when do you need to worry? Well, an outbreak is defined as 2 or more persons, not in the same family, that are going to report illness that they suspect is caused by one food product. So, you know, in my example of your lot, say your lot of strawberries went to the farmer's market, you know, the following Monday, you get 2 calls from 2 unrelated folks, you know, that say they were sick, and they both bought and consumed your strawberries. Foodborne illnesses are going to be reported to the health department by doctors. So a lot of times, you know, we all eat so many different things, and sometimes these illnesses are not going to show up until a good amount of time after you consume a product. So a lot of times people can't figure out what exactly made them sick. I couldn't tell you what I've eaten so far in this week, and it's only Tuesday morning, all the different things I've consumed. So oftentimes it's doctors who are putting the pieces together here. So the doctors are going to report these things to the health department, and then the health department will figure out, you know, if there's a pattern. If you get those calls, if you suspect an outbreak because you've heard from multiple people that they've been ill and it was by one food product, the right person to call there is the county health department. A cluster of illnesses caused by the same pathogen is going to initiate a response and an investigation. So that's what I'll go through next here. So this is one example of how an investigation could go. Obviously, you know, there's lots of different examples, and let's hope that things in restaurants get better this summer, as hopefully we're moving through this global pandemic. So a consumer goes to a restaurant. You know, the restaurant got the food from a supplier. The supplier got the food from you, right? The farmer. So this is one sort of way that the chain could go. The investigative team, it may include folks from the Department of Ag, the Department of Health, those are the two agencies you're probably most likely to hear from. It may include the FDA. So if the outbreak was interstate, so if you sold your produce to a restaurant in Delaware, Pennsylvania, the FDA is going to become involved in that point because it's out of state. So you'll hear from those folks. They're going to give you a call. In the case, in the scenario here that we're talking about, that somebody got sick from a restaurant, they're going to come out to your farm and do a visit. Typically, you'll hear from somebody from MDA before that happens. And I just thought it'd be helpful to walk through some of the things that these folks would ask you. So again, this is all sort of emphasizing the importance of all the different things that the Maryland Food Safety Network encourages you to do. This is one of the reasons, is because, if you were a part of one of these investigations, you'd want to have good records. You want to have all these things sort of at the ready. So they're going to ask you for records documenting where you sold the product, harvest dates and quantities, right? All those traceability records that Carol was talking about. So they're going to ask you for those. They're going to ask you if you have a complaint notification plan, a recall plan, a food safety plan. So these are all evidence of a food safety culture. A couple of years ago, we did on-farm education specifically on this topic, and we had experts from the Department of Health, the Department of Ag, talk and walk through with farmers exactly how this would go. And they, I found it really sort of fascinating, the things that they would ask for and why. And this is really why. It's not like they're going to be going through your food safety plan, looking for any necessarily gap specific things or things from the produce safety rule. They just want to see if you have a plan. How do your workers deal with customer complaints? Have you thought about these things in advance, and what's the food safety culture? So here's some of the other things. And again, you'll recognize all these things because these are the things we talk about in all of our forms of food safety education. Your field harvest and packing practices, location of fields where the produce was grown. So do you know which fields the produce came from? That should be in your traceability records. Do you purchase produce from someone else? If you do you have records about that? Safe use of biological soil amendments, good records like application dates and, turning the compost, treating compost records, irrigation and post-harvest water quality, worker health and hygiene practices. So, have you trained your workers this season, and what do you train your workers? How is that related to your food safety? If you've got livestock on the farm, how do you control wildlife from, getting into your fields? Food contact, equipment, cleaning and sanitizing. So your post-harvest handling. And then, they'll obviously take into consideration if we've had some unusual weather events, flooding, that type of thing that could have caused the contamination. All right, so the whole reason that we did this education a couple of years ago, and that the Agricultural Law Education Initiative created this guide to the recall plan and the model recall plan, is because we had a farmer who said, I really don't know what I would do if someone called and said they were sick from my food. I don't really understand what the different roles are that the regulatory agencies play. So if you suspect that your product may cause a foodborne illness based on an internal discovery, so this was the example of, you get your water testing results back and it's not good news, or for some other reason, could be your compost was, contaminated. A worker didn't handle the compost correctly, and that was spread on produce too soon to harvest. Call the health department and the Maryland Department of Agriculture. The good news with all of this is that I think sometimes people are under the false impression that they're going to be going at this alone, sort of the worst case scenario, and they're going to have to make the decisions, and they're going to have to do customer communications and all of this, alone on the farm. And that's not the case. The regulatory agencies are going to be helping you through this process. And so the Department of Ag and the Department of Health, they're going to coordinate on the recall. And then obviously, like I said, if it involves more than one state, it's also going to be FDA. FDA's got a 24-hour emergency line if you think something is life-threatening. And all of these numbers, these phone numbers that you would need are on the model recall plan that Angela shared with you. So like I said, you're not going to need to make the decision to initiate the recall on your own. There'll be lots of folks to help you through it. If you do need to initiate a recall, how do you go about it? Carol was, explaining the different team member roles. You're going to assemble the team. If you've got an attorney who's, who helps you, or who you've talked to about this in the past, you can contact your legal counsel, contact your insurance carrier. That's going to be an important one. So, make sure that you understand. It'd be a good thing if you, have a conversation with your insurance folks once a year, talk to them about your product liability coverage, and just make sure you are clear on how and when you would need to notify them. And because you don't want to, somehow invalidate your insurance coverage by not properly notifying the insurance folks. So don't forget about that product liability coverage you pay for. Make sure that you notify them in the right way. And obviously, regardless of all the steps that we take to try to help growers be better prepared, it is going to be a stressful situation. There's going to be a lot going on. So we created a recall checklist. It's in Appendix F to the model recall plan. I like checklists. I think they help, sort of keep you on track. So that's a document that you can use as you go through the process. So recall, and then what happens afterwards. So, it's going to require some corrective or preventative measures to remedy the issue. So, whether you end up discovering that the issue is listeria in, refrigerators, or, caused by wildlife intruding in the field and contaminating, once you figure out the cause of the contamination, you're going to have to obviously try to, make some changes and prevent that from happening in the future. Don't forget about updating the plan. So Carol talked about those mock recall, mock traceability exercises, which are great and important to do. But if you end up going through the real deal, the actual recall, that will be the best possible test of the plan, so to speak. And so, you'll have to probably update, revise your plan after you go through that. Obviously, you'll be focused on fully restoring your operation, and you'll have some rebuilding to do in terms of trust with the consumers, depending on, the extent of the recall. And I think at this point, we are open for questions.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you, Carol, for some really important information disseminated to our participants this morning. Does anybody have a question on getting their recall plan together or creating a lot?
So the major point is records, records, records. Good morning, ladies.
Morning.
Good morning, Dr. Bob. Yes, records. Maybe Carol and Sarah, you guys, could you give your perspective on if someone was starting from zero, what would be the most important record to start with here?
I would say your traceability records are obviously going to be your most, most important record. You want to, if you have to recall an amount of your product, you're going to want to recall the smallest amount possible. And so,
right.
And I understand that that's going to be a scaled situation. If you're, if you have a smaller operation, start, basic, but even simple, simple traceability is better than no traceability at all. And having those, clean breaks between those lots, that's really going to help you to not have to, think about recalling an entire season or weeks worth of produce. That if you've got decent traceability records, your recall is going to be a lot easier to handle.
You don't want to have to close the farm.
Exactly.
Just a lot.
Yeah,
Exactly.
So insurance, right? I'm sorry, go ahead, Carol.
No, I was going to say, I always, since I have a more of an ag background, and a business background, I always say, well, all of your trace back is just good business records. And if you're making a profit at the end of the day, you've got those records because you should be doing a profit and loss analysis at the end of the day or the end of the year, so that you can decide, well, okay, I may love okra, but it's just not bringing in, is not paying for the crew. It's not paying for my time. So all of those business records that you're keeping so that you're profitable, are you traced back? So just keep them organized.
Right. Insurance. I hadn't even thought about it. And I'm starting from zero. Haha. Insurance. What is the record recommended and or minimal insurance that you would suggest, ladies?
I mean, product liability insurance, you're going to want to make sure you've got a minimal amount of product liability coverage. Insurance is a little bit tricky to talk about in general because insurance products are all different. I would talk to the insurance agent about where you're selling your product and how you're selling your product. Depending on your buyer, they may require you to have a certain amount of coverage. If you're selling at a farmer's market, most farmers markets are going to require you to have a certain amount of product liability coverage and then name the market as an additional insured on that policy. There are specific recall insurance products. I don't meet many growers who actually have that. It's a very expensive product. I think it's for much larger operations.
Right. Certainly. At least something is better than nothing. Got it.
Yeah, specifically you want coverage that would, specifically for foodborne illness in case your product made someone sick, which is typically going to be a separate product from your general farm liability.
Got it. Thank you.